The first consequence for me was my marriage failed. My addiction was a primary cause of that marriage failure. We didn't see each other. He was at work all the time. I was at home with the kids. I was really angry, really resentful with him. And almost my using was a means of getting at him. Yeah, I tried all sorts of things, but nothing worked because I was the problem. Take away the pain relief of the drugs and the alcohol, all I'm left with is pain. Sat in the garden in tears, and I decided to call the CI helpline. I have been clean and sober since that day. It was the best thing that I've ever done.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Kathryn. Hi listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'm eager to get to my guest and the 12 questions, but a quick announcement first. We have a WhatsApp group now for this pod. Yes, another WhatsApp recovery group, because that's what we all just needed. You can find the link to join in the show notes. This is a great place to exchange meeting details or ask questions you may have about our guests and the pod. Everyone is welcome. The more, the merrier. As I said, the link is in the show notes. Now to our guest for today, Kathryn. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Silvio. My name's Kathryn and I'm an addict. I'm in the Fellowship of Cocaine Anonymous and have been for the past 3.5 years. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kathryn. Without further ado, let's get to our question. The first of the 12 questions I ask every guest on this podcast is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Oh, that's a good question, Silvio. Yes and no is my answer to that one. I had a very happy childhood. Two parents, a man and a woman, mum and dad, and my younger brother. And I grew up in Surrey. Very loving family, very happy childhood. Grandparents lived around the corner. We lived in a really nice place that was on the edge of the town. It felt quite rural, but at the same time connected. And I had lots of friends that lived in the houses around us. And we had a woods at the end of the garden that we were free to play in. So really, really happy childhood. I have really fond memories of my childhood. Yeah, really lovely. But rather unfortunately, my father passed away when I was 15. He was very ill for, do you know what? I really can't remember the number of years, but in my head, it's from the age of about 11 through to when he died, the September after my 15th birthday. He had brain cancer. And the whole process of that illness and his death really changed our family. In some positive ways, but that positivity has taken a number of years to come out. But that really, that had a massive impact on me as a 15-year-old. It was just before I did my GCSEs. My mum, God love her, was devastated, absolutely devastated. And she, in a way, rejected us as a result of that. She didn't really know how to handle her grief, her bereavement. She got rid of everything to do with my dad very quickly, kind of within a week. There was nothing in the house that had anything to do with him. She became quite distant from us and she started to drink very heavily. She's not one of us because when she was told by the doctor that if she didn't stop drinking, she would seriously damage her liver, she immediately stopped and can now have one glass of wine, maybe two, and put it down and walk away from it, which is great for her.
We tip our hats off to those people, don't we?
Absolutely. And, at the end of the day, we went through a very rocky period as a family, but my brother, my mum and I are really close. We have a really tight relationship, the three of us, which is lovely.
Yeah. It must be incomprehensible, I suppose, if your idyllic life is smashed to pieces in such a way. And I'm wondering, especially given what you said about your mum turning to the bottle, I think would be what people in Surrey might say. With your mum sort of starting to drink and things, whether, this is pure conjecture, whether this has left a sort of thing in the back of your head that this is what you do.
I think to a certain extent, yes. My grandfather used to bring my mum what he used to refer to as a bunch of daffodils. And it all started one Easter when he bought her a bottle of scotch as her Easter present and turned up and said, I didn't bother getting you daffodils, I just got you this. And so from then on, the bottle of scotch became referred to as a bunch of daffodils. And if you had a scotch, it was time for a daffodil. So yeah, it did become quite normal, I suppose, to turn to alcohol in times of trouble.
Yeah.
And up until that point, my family wasn't a drinking family at all. My dad used to have the odd beer here and there, and he used to give a bit to the dog, which always used to make me laugh.
Not recommended.
No, not recommended. Dog used to get wobbly legs afterwards.
Yeah.
But, we weren't a drinking family. There was never wine on the table at dinner. There was never drink around. It was very much a special occasion occurrence to have alcohol present. But yeah, I think also I was daddy's little girl. I absolutely adored my father. I spent all my free time when I wasn't with my friends, riding my bike and playing in the woods. I spent all my time with him in his workshop. And mum was closer to my brother, or that's how it certainly felt to me at the time. So all of a sudden I felt quite alone. Mum didn't really give us any love and affection because she was struggling with her own emotions and grief. And then dad wasn't there. It left a really big hole.
Yeah. It's too simplistic, I think, to say, oh, here we go, we just fill that hole, with our drink or drug of choice, we lose control and then we come to the rooms. It's such a, just as with your mother, for instance, who had all the reason in the world to become an alcoholic, but she just isn't, right? And so many, situations and people that we speak to, and you think there's every reason in the world for them not to be an alcoholic, and yet they are. So it doesn't really work in this sort of linear kind of way. And but it is a heavy loss, and it leaves a massive hole and trauma. If you are alcoholic, as in not in terms of the much as a character type, right? If you are alcoholic, if you are an addict in your personal DNA as a person, not saying it's genetic, but in your personal makeup, then trauma will put petrol on the flames. Our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like? So you're growing up in this idyllic place, and you have it sounds idyllic as the word suggests, and with the swings at the back and things. It's lovely. And here comes this heavy loss that you've suffered early on. Trauma comes into your life. Did you encounter your drug of choice and alcohol right away after this, or did it take a bit longer? And were there fun times to start with? And what did they look like, if there were?
It took a number of years, if I'm honest. I did start drinking when I was 14, 15. So in the run up to my father passing away, I had a very close friend who was a little bit older than me, had a car. We used to go out for drinks. We used to drink Malibu and pineapple at 4 revolting.
Yeah.
And I did notice at the time that sense of ease, not so much a comfort at that stage, but more a sense of ease. I lost my confidence when my father died. I felt very insecure. And I think the alcohol gave me that ability to go out into situations that I'd felt fearful of, I suppose, a little bit anxious around. I went off to university and experimented with pot, smoked hash a little bit, drank not very much to start with. I then went through a period where I drank a phenomenal amount, and I can remember being driven home from a friend's party, having gone into blackout during the party and ended up starting a tomato ketchup fight which I discovered the next morning because I woke up and my white blouse was completely orange. And I had no recollection of it. And I can remember on the journey back to my Horsa residence asking the person who was driving me 3 times to stop so I could be sick out of the car door. Yeah, I went back for more. It was university. That's what you did, wasn't it? You got drunk, you had those hangovers, you threw up, you did all of that. And then when I left university, I got married very quickly after I left university. And I wasn't really drinking very much at all at that point. But my marriage, unfortunately, failed fairly quickly. And I left my husband at the time about 18 months after we were married. Was working. Alcohol and drugs weren't really a part of my life at that point. I was driving a lot, so there wasn't really the opportunity for me to drink. And life was okay. So I didn't really feel I needed it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because often, not always, but often we, specifically people who drink and who do drugs, there's a party stage. There certainly was for me. Not for everybody, of course, but there certainly was for me, right? You go through this time where you're discovering that this stuff can do things for you that, you find you struggle with, So, I've often said, it turned me into a sort of superhero version, or I felt like it did. It didn't actually do that. It turned me into this super Silvio, this guy who was much more comfortable with talking to women, and specifically when I took amphetamines and cocaine, I'd just be a lot more at ease, a lot cooler. Everything just kind of like, I had a coat of Teflon on and everything would just drop off me type thing, So often we have this sort of party stage, and you seem to have a bit of it, but that wasn't really your course, is what I'm hearing.
I got to it eventually.
Right, all right, well, let's have it.
I think when I was at university, I was actually quite scared of drugs. I was actually quite frightened of them. But I was introduced to cocaine in the workplace, rather unusually. I was a lawyer in the city, and it was something that people did to get through those deals that went on all night. It was something I'd never done before. I was tired. I was told it would help. So off I went. And that was the moment. That was the moment for me that I was hooked. And it then from there became, I don't remember taking it at work again. After that, it was the one time only. But I took it every weekend. And I can very much remember, this was back in the year 2000. So I was coming up for 31 years old at that time. And I can remember having my first pill at a friend's flat who lived in a block of flats in Camden, right by King's Cross Station. And you could get up onto the roof of the block of flats. So we all popped a pill and went up onto the roof, and you can see St Pancras Station from the roof. And I can just remember that euphoric feeling of, oh my word, what is this? This is just amazing. And I can feel it coming now as I'm talking to you. It's arms are getting sweaty and I'm getting a bit hot just thinking about it. But yeah, that was when it really grabbed me. It was the year 2000, and it kept hold of me for the best part of 20 years.
Yeah. Speaking of euphoria and ecstasy, I remember that the first few pills I took, and that sense of euphoria is something I've never experienced again, no matter how many pills I popped or other drugs that I took. That's
You're always seeking it though,
that's
aren't you?
right,
You're always
absolutely.
trying to find that first experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like you never found it again.
I was living in Paris at the time, and Paris is beautiful, even on a very sober, on a really random day, and I walking through those streets, and and that sense of freedom and hanging out and everything is just so beautiful. It was at that time, it seemed to just complete me. It was wonderful. Not for long, but for that moment, it really was. So it had you in its grips.
And yeah, got me very early on as well. And I can remember, going out on a Friday night, and as soon as somebody mentioned scoring, that was it. I had to score. Somebody had mentioned it. It was in my head. I had to get it. But at the time, I didn't appreciate what that meant.
Yeah.
In terms of me as an addict, in terms of me and my personality, I thought everybody else was doing it the same as me. But thinking back now to those times, as soon as somebody mentioned the word cocaine, that was it. I had to have it. And I would literally go to any lengths to get it. I wouldn't be happy until I got it.
I used to pride myself on being the guy in the club that if I could go into any club, anywhere in the world, go in and I walk in, and within, I don't know, a short amount of time, because I'm quite impatient, yay, a short amount of time, I'd have managed to score, right? And I badge of honor at the time, but I could also not stand the idea of having made up my mind, or felt like I'd made up my mind, that I was going to drink and use, that I was going to use, and then, not scoring within, half an hour of that was a real first world tragedy right there, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was married again by that point. And my husband, we're no longer together, unfortunately, but he would perhaps make a suggestion about getting some, and we'd call a couple of dealers and they wouldn't answer. And he'd be like, oh, well, never mind. Let's just go and have a beer. And I went, what do you mean, never mind?
Yeah. This is when you double down, right?
You mentioned it.
This is when you show your true colors, and show what you've got in your, like it's some sort of halftime talk at a sports game, Yeah, I hear that. Did you at that time, though, find that your behavior was a bit suspicious, or did anybody say anything, or did you just think this is what everybody does and therefore it's okay?
I think the latter. I mean, I was part of a group of people who met every Friday night and partied through till Saturday morning, maybe Saturday afternoon. We all crashed at somebody's house. We'd stay, and then we'd order an Indian takeaway. And then after that, probably Sunday morning, we'd crawl home and everybody'd go back to work on Monday. So everybody around me was doing the same as me. And it's only since I came into recovery, looking back, I can recognize that I was the one that once I got the bit between my teeth, I wasn't going to let it go, whereas others around me would. But there were a couple of people in that group who have been in the rooms since. And I can remember saying to my husband at the time, I can't understand why they're throwing their money away over this. One of them had spent all of her inheritance from her grandmother. She inherited over £100,000 and she'd sniffed the whole lot up her nose. And then lo and behold, 15 years later, I'm in exactly the same position.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? The delusion. I mean, even later on when I was further down the line, I would still think of addicts being always other people. Addict is other people, it's people who live on the street and all sorts. It was like, I'm not one of those. No matter how bad my hangover was.
And I think for me at that time, I wasn't using every day. I was still working as a city lawyer. I was still working phenomenally long hours and partying really hard Friday and Saturday. So in my head, that didn't make me an addict because I didn't touch it Monday to Friday. I would drink during the week, but I wouldn't touch drugs during the week. It was only at the weekends, whereas these couple of friends were using all the time. But as I say, fast forward 15 years and I'm using all the time.
Let's get to that, to this progression. And that's our question 3. What were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom. So you start experimenting with cocaine, but you're still holding down a very good job, a prestigious job. So, you couldn't possibly be an addict in that rationale. Somehow, though, things progressed. And it may take a little while for us to get to the rock bottom and the rooms, but how did it progress?
It progressed for me quite slowly. I have 2 children. One is 18 and one is just about to turn 16. And it's really only since they were born that my using really racked up. I didn't use or drink when I was pregnant with them. I was very seriously ill after my second daughter was born and spent quite a number of weeks in intensive care. And in fact, I'm very lucky to still be here after that. And that stopped me for a while because I had 2 small children. I'd nearly lost my life. But I made the decision, and I sometimes think that this is where it turned for me. Having had that life-changing experience of nearly not seeing my children grow up, I decided that I wanted to be there for them all the time. I wanted to see every minute of them growing up. So I gave up my career and I became a stay-at-home mum. And I really don't think I thought it through quite properly in reflection. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I was then at home doing something that I had no idea what to do. I had no idea which way up the children went, let alone how to work them, how to make them behave or do anything. I was completely out of my depth. My husband at the time was also a lawyer, was working extremely long hours, and I was incredibly lonely. Very, very lonely. And I needed at the time to create something for me out of all of that. And my addict brain tells me that creating something for me is having a gin and tonic at 6:00 every night and then moving on to a bottle of wine. And for a while, that's all it was. And my husband was a very heavy drinker. And we were still using, but only on occasions. And we were still, the children would go off to their grandparents for a week so that we could have some party time. But it then started getting really out of control. And I think the first consequence for me was my marriage failed. And I think this, sitting here talking to you now, is probably the first time I've acknowledged that my addiction was a primary cause of that marriage failure. We didn't see each other. He was at work all the time. I was at home with the kids. I was really angry, really resentful with him. And almost my using was in my head, it was a means of getting at him. You're behaving like this. We're not together. Oh, I'm going to show you. I'm going to have a grammar coat tonight and stay up till 3:00 in the morning. Which is just nuts. I mean, it's insane to think that that's going to have any effect on anybody at all.
It's addict logic is what that is, right? It's I feel resentful, so I'm going to get back at you by hurting myself. Yeah, I've heard it many times. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that was the first kind of consequence, was my marriage failed, which left me on my own with 2 children and no income because I'd given up my career to look after my children. So I think that was another kind of knock-on consequence of my behavior and what, my selfishness, I think. I nearly lost my life. I want to be with my children. I'm going to give up my job. It was all about me. It wasn't about anybody else. And after my husband left, that was when it really started to grab hold of me. And every other weekend when the kids were with their dad, I would be using and drinking. I'd be out. I put myself onto Tinder, and I was out there. I have managed to find myself a partner on Tinder, and we've been together for coming up for 9 years now. And he worked in a live music venue,
Right.
which to me was just amazing. I'm in my 40s by this time. I've got 2 children at home. I've got weekends where all my friends were busy with their families. So again, I felt very lonely. And it was a bar full of young people. I ended up working in the bar and I was using every other weekend, but that every other weekend became every weekend because I found being with the children quite boring after being partying all weekend. And then that gradually crept into using every day. And I would drink 2 bottles of wine every night after the children had gone to bed, never used when they were awake. And then I would use probably a gram of cocaine, go to bed at 3:00 in the morning, get up at 5:30, 6, take the children to school, and then go back to bed, sleep till 2:00 in the afternoon, get up, go and pick them up from school, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat.
It sounds very lonely.
It was very, very lonely. Very lonely. It was lockdown that brought me to my knees.
I think single parenting is quite a lonely experience anyway, from what I know from friends that I have who are single parents, and it's extremely involving. It makes you very time poor, and I think it also leads to some sort of isolation in some way. or it can do anyway. I'm not knocking this in any way, shape, or form, but the difficulties of the situation, are that you might not have enough time to be with people of your own age. They say it takes a village to bring up a child, and if it's just a one-person village, then that person has to work extremely hard. So I think from what you're saying, this was a real factor, in you not becoming an addict, but in this progression.
Yeah, it was. It was a real factor. It was the isolation. It was the loneliness. It was the loss of identity as well. I became my children's mum. People never used to use my name. I was always my child's name, Mummy. And, I didn't have any adult conversations because when the children went to bed, my God, the house went so quiet when the children went to bed. It was just so lonely. And it just, that loneliness just kind of engulfed me. And I took solace in wine and cocaine. And I used to sit on the sofa watching programs like Silent Witness and, those kind of series. And I started crocheting. I taught myself to crochet. I've made so many crochet blankets because when you're high on coke and drink, you crochet so fast. It just, and that's what I did. I used to literally sit on my sofa, bottle of wine, grab coke, crochet, and I'd sit there for hours.
Oh my God, this
And
is
hours,
so
just
sad.
all around.
It is so sad. And I have my personal version of this, and it goes like this, okay? It's called Clammy Hands Tetris. Okay, so
Okay.
yeah, which is equally sad with a less tangible result. All right, so because here I am, I need to occupy my hands, right, while I'm sitting at home. Similarly, there's something on the telly going on. I'm drinking and I'm using, and at some point I need to do something with my hands. I'm just kind of wired, and and for me it was always Tetris, which is very, very sad. And the only thing I ever broke was, well, my high score. And yay. You've got very little to show for this. It's just such a sad existence.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think the biggest thing for me with it all was there was no accountability. There was no other adult around to question what I was doing. And I think that's where lockdown came in and brought me to my knees, because the accountability kicked in, and that was what I needed for me to hit my rock bottom.
How did that come about then?
It came about because my partner, who I'd been with for 4 years when we hit lockdown, he lived above the music venue that he worked in. And of course, lockdown, they closed the venue. He had nowhere to live. So he came to live here with me, which is lovely. He still lives here now, and we're very happy together, which is amazing.
It is amazing.
For the first time in what I would call my serious using years, I had to justify my behavior to somebody else. And my behavior was being seen by somebody who understood what I was doing. I mean, my children could see that I was hungover, that I was sleeping all the time, that I was losing weight, that I was really skinny and looked really unhealthy. And I'm sure that they were very concerned about me, and in fact that I was ill.
Yeah.
For the first time, I'd got an adult that was asking me, do you really need another glass of wine? You've drunk a bottle. Do you want to open the next? Do you really want to open another bottle? And I think what really did it for me is he and I used to drink and use heavily when we were working, and he used to as well. But as soon as he moved in here, he stopped.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Yeah.
He still smokes pot every day, all day. So I think if he was honest with himself, he would say that he is an addict, but he doesn't want to give it up. It's not causing him any problems yet. But the cocaine and the booze, he can just put down. Pot's not something that I like particularly. I dabbled in it at university, but I don't like it. It makes me feel sick. So it's not something that tempts me at all, and I can have it around quite comfortably. But I think it was the fact that he stopped drinking and I was still drinking 2 bottles of wine, and I was still buying a gram of coke a day, meeting the dealer on the corner before 8:30 in the evening because they stopped coming round at 9 o'clock at night because of lockdown, and having to justify why I was going out. So all of a sudden, those questions started coming in. And for the first time, I found myself lying about my addiction and hiding it from him, to the point that he ended up filming me. He set his phone up in my bedroom where I have a dressing table, which was where I used to use coke all the time. I have a little drawer to one side where I used to keep all of the paraphernalia that went with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he noticed that every time I went to the toilet upstairs in the room above the television room, the floorboards would creak because I'd pull the chair out, the drawer would open, then the drawer would shut, then the chair would go back, then I'd go to the toilet. So he set his mobile phone up and recorded me.
Ouch.
And even when presented with that evidence, I still denied it. I still denied it.
How'd you deny? Did you just say, "Oh, it's like a deep fake or something"? What? How did you deny it?
I just said it was just one off.
Right.
I said, "Oh, I don't do it very often. It's just a one off. I just found, I've just got some in the drawer. I fancy one. If you want to go and have one, you go and have one." Just completely battered it away. So I did at that point agree to stop with the coke, and I did stop with the coke. But the alcohol then really took hold of me. I mean, that alcohol reading is so spot on. Take away one drug and the other one becomes a problem.
Exactly my experience as well, yes.
Yeah, boy, did it become a problem. I suddenly found myself buying a quarter bottle of vodka at 8:30 in the morning when I went to get a paper because my partner was restricting the amount of booze that I would have of an evening. So we would, you'd say, right, we're only going to have one bottle of wine tonight, and when it's gone, it's gone. I still needed to get that. So I was drinking at 8:30 in the morning. I'd go and get the newspaper. I'd buy a quart bottle of vodka. I'd drink it on the way home. I'd walk through the front door. I'd be asked if I'd had a drink, and I'd stand there and say, "No, I've just been to get the paper. Of course I haven't had a drink." And then I was hiding bottles in the girls' roller skates in the porch of our house so that I could go and have a sip of an evening and he wouldn't know it was there. I mean, it's insane what I did.
Did you realize what you were doing and that you were kind of doomed?
Not to start with. But then, yes, the reality of it crept in. And I think in my heart of hearts, I knew and had known for a while that I had a problem. And I had this little phrase before lockdown, "Oh, one vice at a time. I won't have any coke this week, but I'll just drink." Or, "I won't have any drink this week. I can't give up both at the same time. That's too hard. That's being hard on myself. Treat myself gently." But I think...
Easy does it.
I think, exactly. I think that my partner changed visibly when he discovered what I was doing, and through him trying to stop me. I mean, he literally just kind of did this, just kind of shrunk down into this, shoulders hunched, wouldn't look me in the eye. And I think I suddenly had the realization that I was going to lose the person who meant the most to me in the world. And I'd already lost one husband through my addiction. But still at that point, I didn't really know how to do it or what to do. And I was half-heartedly stopping and still trying to hide it. I'd pour out a bit of lemonade from a bottle and I'd put the vodka in it or whatever, and then walk around with a bottle of lemonade all day thinking nobody knew what I was doing. I mean, it's pitiful, really. And I don't really know what snapped, but one of my neighbours is an alcoholic. And I said to her, could she introduce me to one of her fellows? Because she no longer goes to meetings. She's been sober for coming up for 20 years, but she's not active in the fellowship. But she put me in touch with somebody, and I went along to a couple of AA meetings online because we were still in lockdown. But I didn't feel very welcome because I was still drinking. So I wasn't allowed to share. That was one of their requirements, that if you had a drink in the last 24 hours, you weren't allowed to share. And it didn't really do anything for me. So I decided I was going to get a counsellor instead of the fellowship. And I can remember having the interview with the counsellor, drinking while I was with her. A bottle of lemonade, so she didn't see that it was drink, and saying to her, "Oh yeah, I gave up drink 3 months ago. I haven't had a drink for 3 months," because that was their requirement to get the counselling, was that you haven't had a drink for 3 months. Lying through my teeth. And I started the counselling, and it didn't really do anything for me. Then there was one Sunday afternoon, it was in April 2021, and I had decided I wanted to re-creosote the fence that goes around the back of the garden, and I was using while I was doing it. So I would paint a panel of fence, I'd go upstairs, I'd have a line, come down, paint another panel of fence. And halfway through the afternoon, my partner came downstairs with the wrap in his hand, and he just put his hand out in front of me with this wrap in his hand, and he said, "I don't know what else to do. I can't help you, but you got to stop." And I can remember my whole insides just flipping. I can remember that kind of real sick feeling, thinking, what have I become? Who have I turned into? And the tears came, and I had another line. And I think as I had that other line, I realized that I didn't actually want to do it anymore. I was just doing it because I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't stop. Because when I stopped, I felt terrible. So I used to stop feeling terrible. And it was about 6:15 on a Sunday afternoon. It was April the 25th. And I sat in the garden in tears. And I decided to call the CA helpline. I Googled the number, I called, and I have been clean and sober since that day. And it was the best thing that I've ever done. And I only knew about the CA helpline from the posters that somebody from the fellowship had put on the toilet doors in the venue that I used to work in.
So let's have a quick acknowledgement of those people working in
Absolutely.
PI and those people who man the helpline, woman the helpline, person the helpline, insert as appropriate.
Yeah.
That's really, really amazing.
And also the responders. We need to mention the responders as well, because I spoke to a very, very kind gentleman whose name was Matt. And when I got to a year sober, I sent him a message to say, thank you.
Oh,
Managed
lovely.
to get to a year. But he put me in touch with somebody locally who phoned me within 15, 20 minutes and met me the next day and held my hand as I came into the rooms. And, without those people giving up their time to do that, I might not be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful. And the way you've just taken me back to the last 6 months of my drinking and using, which there's so much overlap there, which I'm not going to bore you with, but the alcohol, though, how I was also determined in the last few months, so right, I understood that, this was the source of all evil, and I had to stop and all the rest of it. And all of a sudden I do things that, even in my head, real alcoholics do. It's midday and I am in the kitchen. I'm drinking the port wine that is supposed to be there for like cooking and stuff, and I'm just necking the stuff, filling it up with water, right? So that my wife wouldn't notice, and all those things, right? So thank you for sharing that. It's really, really powerful. Question 4. At your worst, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide? If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
No. I can honestly say no. I wouldn't leave my children.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that ever entered my head. Life was difficult. Life was wrong in many, many ways through what I was doing, but I loved my children. And having lost my father when I was 15, having 2 parents in their lives has been really, really important for me. So no, that wasn't anything, that never crossed my mind. Never.
Our question 5, and we sort of touched on it a bit, but let's elaborate, please. Our question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
Oh, well, I've already mentioned my one vice at a time, which surprisingly enough never worked. So I would either not drink or I would not use, but not surprisingly, if I was drinking, I would get to a point of an evening where I'd had that much to drink that I would hit the fuck it button and score anyway. I tried not having any alcohol in the house. I tried buying in bulk. I thought that was a good idea. So I had a wine delivery every month. So I had 12 bottles. That's going to last me a month. I think it probably lasted me 2 weeks. And I would buy bulk Coke. So the dealer that I used to use, if you bought 5 wraps, you got the 6th free. So I would meet him and I said, right, I'll have 5 and get the 6th free. And then that'll last me for a week, at least, maybe 2 weeks. And I'd put them in various different places so that they weren't all together. But that never worked. And particularly in lockdown, because I think by the time I hit lockdown and my partner had moved in, I realized that I was in trouble, that I did have a problem. So I would definitely not have any cash in the house. I would not have any booze in the house. I started stealing my daughter's pocket money because they would get cash from me and their dad. And they were very good at saving. And so they would have enough money. And then the next day I'd go to the cash point machine, get it and replace it. So they never knew it was gone. Or if I didn't have the time to go to cash point machine, I'd put a little mummy IOU note. And not having the booze in the house, that didn't work either because deliveries became so prevalent. I mean, I live in North London.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could get anything through Uber Eats and that kind of thing at the time. So all of that didn't, and then I tried just not drinking at all at home and not having it in the house. And that was when I ended up with morning walks to get the bottle of vodka. So yeah, I tried all sorts of things. But I think for a long while, I thought what I was doing was normal, particularly being a parent, because lots of parents talk about having a drink when the kids have gone to bed and rah. But what they were doing is having a drink. And I was having lots of drinks. I tried all sorts of things, Sylvia, I really did, but nothing works. Nothing worked because I was the problem. And, take away the pain relief of the drugs and the alcohol, all I'm left with is pain. And what do I do to get rid of that pain?
You medicate.
You medicate, exactly. Exactly. So it didn't matter what steps I put in place to stop me medicating, I would still end up medicating.
Our question 6. Once you got to the rooms, did you struggle with the word God?
Yes and no. No, in terms of saying the word God. It's a word that I've used all through my life. I went to church with my family as a child. I went to Sunday school as a child. And in my teenage years, I joined the church youth group and had some amazing times. But what changed for me with that is my father passing away. And I think from my point of view, I actually had a massive resentment against God, or the God that I'd grown up with. So whilst I didn't have trouble with the word God in that sense, I did have trouble using it because I don't want to be part of that side of God, that God.
Yeah.
I needed it to be my God. And I think using the word God for my God felt wrong to start with because it's not God. Am I making any sense?
Very much so. Now, this is obviously after, a few years of sobriety. At the time, of course, you didn't really have that knowledge, I assume, to sort of neatly sum it up like you just have. So at the very beginning, this problem that you had with the word God, how did that manifest?
I used to use the words higher power instead of God. I found it very difficult to talk about God. It would be higher power. My sponsor, second sponsor, introduced me to 10 and 10 prayer and meditation, which I have found so amazing in terms of building that relationship with my higher power. And for me, it's not God. because God to me is the big man in the sky with the beard that sits up. And for me, that kind of organized religion side of God is more of a headmaster. You have to be subservient. You have to worship. You have to do things in church in the right order. You have to say the same words all the time in the right order and to me it just felt like, automatons. There wasn't any originality to it at any point. It was just people just doing. And I think that the 10 and 10 prayer and meditation for me has made it so that I'm having a conversation with my higher power, who I just call my friend. I don't use the word God. I don't use the words higher power. It's just, good morning, my friend.
That's lovely. And it's a wonderful way of dovetailing into our question 7, which is, how do you experience your friend today?
My friend's by my side every single step of the way. Every single step of the way. And as I said, it starts with my 10 and 10 prayer and meditation in the morning, which is 10 minutes talking out loud to myself, and then 10 minutes quietly reflecting on what I've spoken about.
But you do it that way around, so you speak first and then you meditate. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try that. I'll mix it up a bit.
It does. I honestly thought it wouldn't work. When my sponsor first suggested it to me, I went, oh, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. I'm not doing that. It's not going to work.
I know it the other way around, but...
Oh, okay. I've not heard of it the other way around. So that's interesting. But it works really well because it's I get up in the morning. I don't sit while I'm doing it. I sit for the meditation part, but not for the conversation. So I get up in the morning, I make a coffee, and I start my conversation with my friend. Good morning, my friend. Thank you for another day clean and sober. Isn't it great to still be alive? And it just goes on from that. And it's become, for me, like a conversation between the good me and the not so good me, the addict side of me and the non-addict side of me, just kind of balancing out each other. And, when I say, oh, I think I'm going to do something, and the other part of me will say, no, that's a really silly idea. You don't want to do that. And it's just kind of like a little argument, I suppose, between good and bad. So my higher power is here. It's right inside me. It's not up there like God in the sky. It's not the universe. It's me. It's within me. It's finding inner peace within me. And it started with the love in the rooms. It started with the hugs that you get when you arrive in a face-to-face room. It started with the smiles. It started with the laughter. It started with the unity. And I think for me, it really helped me to see that there was love in the world and that I wasn't on my own, because there were all these people around me all the time. But yeah, I just my higher power is my best friend.
Lovely. Thank you. Our question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
That's a really interesting one. Step 1, 2, and 3, not hard at all. I knew when I came into the room that I was powerless. I knew. Absolutely knew I was powerless. The moment I dialed that CA helpline, that was when my step 1 was done. Step 2 and 3 didn't really feel too much of a problem. Having been in a religious background as a child, I had the concept of some power greater than myself. I didn't want that concept. Step 4, I found really hard. Really, really hard. I could not see my part in anything at all. And I can remember procrastinating no end about it, to the point of phoning one of the fellows who had helped me find my sponsor initially, and saying to them, I'm really struggling with step 4, and getting there, oh, I don't understand that. Step 4 is so free, and just get on with it. It'll be amazing. Right, but I don't know how to get on with it. And the advice I was given, which I found incredibly helpful, was if you would see that person from your past in Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Asda, whichever supermarket you use, and you would hide, you would duck behind a different aisle to avoid speaking to them, avoid even acknowledging them, they need to go on your step 4. And as soon as I was told that, I could do all of that bit. I could do all of the people. I could do all of the circumstances. But when it came to my part, I really struggled. And my sponsor had to walk me through every single step for resentment to highlight my part. So that for me, I think, was probably the hardest step. And I think primarily because I overanalyzed it. Funny that, isn't it? Addicts don't do that, do they? Overanalyzed it, overcomplicated it, tried to understand it in a way that you can't really understand. I wanted to read an instruction manual that told me how to do this in a step-by-step way. And of course, that's not going to work. It has to come from your heart. It has to come from within. So that, I think, for me, was probably the hardest.
Step 4 blindness, if you will, right, is something that I've struggled with a lot. I found it extremely difficult to see my part in things, not because it wasn't obvious, it's because I didn't want to, I think. It would meant I had to change. It meant I had to change. And in a weird sort of way, I had found a lot of comfort in being stuck in that place, right? It's just that it had come to the point where it was either I do this or it'll kill me. So that was the last moment for me to sort of jump off, and I jumped and saw my part in things, but I needed, that's part and parcel why step 5 is step 5. We need to talk to it about someone else and to God. It's just that. It's just that we have someone there who can bear witness and be part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
I think also from my point of view, because my using had been so isolated, it was me on my own at home for 90% of it. I couldn't see how that had affected anybody because there was nobody there with me apart from the children. So, the children, obviously, they went on my step 4 list. My ex-husband went on my step 4 list. My parents did. But once I got to that point, it was just like, who else? There was nobody here. How could I have affected anybody else? And it was, I needed that encouragement to be able to think further afield from that and to explore it in a different way, because it's not about who you're with, it's about who it's impacted by it.
Yeah. Did you, in your step 4, did you have God on there? You said you had a massive resentment against God. You did, okay.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
My second step 4 was only about God.
Yeah.
There was nothing else. All the other stuff had been cleared beforehand, right? It was just about God, and all that anger and resentment I had stored up against this fictional picture, because that's like 2-dimensional picture that I had made up in my mind. So was it similar for you then?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, God was definitely, it was top of my step 4 was the first thing that went on there was God. And I think for me, because of the way organized Christianity is, I just could not understand why somebody or something who loved me so much could see me go through so much hurt as a 15-year-old child.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an interesting conversation with my sponsor, but definitely one that I needed to have, because it enabled me to then move forward more securely with my best friend.
Yeah. Slightly off script, how did you find peace with that question that you've just asked? How could a being that is so incredibly loving see me through so much hurt when I was a 15-year-old child? How did you reframe that question, or how did you find peace with this?
I think really for me, it was an acknowledgement that it was me that had shut the door on God, not God that had shut the door on me. And that if I had opened up my heart and my mind to a power greater than myself at that time, I would have probably had a very different experience, because everything in life happens to us for a reason, I believe. And I am who I am today because of that experience. And I think it was an acknowledgement through my step 4 that I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't had those experiences, and that those experiences were there to teach me something. And I had to be open to learn. And I wasn't at the time, because the anger just shielded, it just veiled everything.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose it's fair to say, just speaking of my own experiences here, there was then for me ample time after the anger about a certain event may have subsided, right? Or wasn't quite as, years later after an event. But I still would never sort of take it back up with God, right? It's not like I then sort of ran away, was very angry, slammed the door, have a tantrum, and then eventually come back into the room. I just stayed outside. I just stayed out there. Interesting.
Yeah.
Our question 9. Which character defects give you most trouble?
The list is so long. I never thought I had that many character defects.
Let's have the highlights.
My friend likes to call them shortcomings rather than character defects, because character defects is quite a harsh phrase, isn't it? For me, my biggest is people pleasing. Massively. And it's something that I have to address on a daily basis still, 3.5 years into recovery. And that goes hand in hand with perfectionism, control. But yeah, people pleasing is my big one.
Right. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
It's a cliche, but it's given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. And there were times when I said early on in recovery that I didn't know what that was. But fundamentally, the best thing that it's given me is the ability to like myself, to love myself, and to realize, despite my people pleasing, that I don't need anybody in my life as long as I've got a connection with my best friend.
Yeah.
And I didn't like myself. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I liked. And I think a lot of that came from the insecurity that came out of Dad passing away. I spent years just trying to fit in, to the point where I was Kathryn to some people, I was Kat to others, I was Katie to others. My family called me Henrietta. And each of those names had a different personality, different likes and dislikes. I started liking music that I wouldn't dream of listening to now because it's horrible. But I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be part of something. And I think for me, recovery has given me the ability not to need that anymore. I can just be me. And I finally know who me is. And me is Kathryn.
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you, Kathryn. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict? So, to be fair, it's 2 questions a little bit in one. What do you say to a newcomer or someone wondering? But let's hit them one after the other.
First thing I'd say to a newcomer is welcome. Welcome to the fellowship. Welcome to a program that gives you a manual for living. And I think, what have you got to lose? If you don't like what's being suggested, what's the alternative? You go back to where you were. I mean, for me, I don't know what would have happened. I mean, the consequences weren't huge. I hadn't lost my children. I hadn't lost my house. I hadn't lost my partner. But there was a yet at the end of each of those for me. And I had nothing else to lose. It was use every day or give it a try. So I gave it a try and never thought I would hear myself say that I am grateful to be an addict. But I am really grateful to be an addict, because life is beautiful. Life is fun. Life is warm. Life is loving. I have confidence that I never thought existed. I always thought I needed to take a drink or a drug to have that confidence, to dance like a lunatic, to do whatever. No, I didn't. Not at all. And And it's really given me the ability to just grab life and love it, without without being critical all the time, just accepting it for what it is. So, anybody new, welcome. You're in the best place. Grab this program with both hands, put some action in, take the steps, do the suggestions, and see what happens. It can't be any worse than where you already are.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we think, or I thought, of addicts as people who have lost their homes and all sorts of other things. It's interesting that for those of us where that hasn't happened yet or hadn't happened yet, right? That we look at our lives first and we think about what we haven't lost, So, okay, I'm still living in the same flat and my car's still outside or whatever it is, but we don't ever really consider enough, that I'd lost my self-respect, lost my sense of shame, or my sense of, even in some parts, my dignity, all those sort of things. They never show up first on that list, do they? The first thing that shows up, I'm still living in the same flat, or, my wife is still here. She was just about hanging on, to be fair. But I find it interesting. We always look at material things first.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting.
I think the biggest thing for me, though, in terms of what I lost is some of the best years of my children's lives. I mean, I was using for 10 years of their life, and they're 18 and 16. So, I lost so much of that time. And there are things that even now they'll mention, and I've got no recollection of it whatsoever. And that's really hard, because I find it difficult to let them know that I don't remember it, because they don't fully understand why. But at the same time, I don't want to pretend that I remember it, because that's not right either.
No, it's just dishonest, of course.
Yeah. So, for me, that is what, the material things, they hadn't happened yet. But the biggest thing I had lost is that time with my children.
Slightly off script, how do you deal with your children and the fact that you have this using past, and how much have you told them about this, and what comprehension do they have of this whole issue?
They understand it quite well, actually. I have not spoken very frequently about drugs. For them, it's alcohol. And to start with, they were of the opinion that I was going into AA, not CA. Because I didn't want them to know about that. But now I'm clean, I'm sober, and the program is giving me so many benefits. I have now told them that it's CA, not AA, and that it wasn't just alcohol that I had a problem with. We have an amazing relationship now. I have with both my girls. And I can see the program working through them too. I can see some of the things that they do are part of the program. Some of the ways that they're thinking is because of me and the program. It's, action, not emotion, isn't it? And they are massively supportive. I think my eldest daughter probably still doesn't quite trust that I'm not going to pick up again. Whereas my youngest one has every faith and every trust that I will not pick up a drink or drug again.
It can take a long time for that trust to rebuild. I know this from my own experience. It can take a long time.
Yeah, it can take.
And that's fair enough,
Absolutely.
That's fair enough.
Absolutely. But we have so much fun together. So much fun together. More fun than we ever had when I was drinking and using. And I thought when I came into the rooms that I'd never have fun again because I wasn't able to drink or use. I didn't know what fun was until having fun sober.
Because it sounds like a lot of fun to go out, have a line, go outside, do one panel, paint one panel of your fence, go back inside and repeat ad nauseum for an entire afternoon. It's great fun. Absolutely.
Yeah, loads of fun, wasn't it?
Yay.
But now, we're dancing in our kitchen every evening when we cook dinner. My children bought me a tea towel that says this kitchen is made for dancing.
Ooh.
And the music goes on when I finish work and we cook. And we dance and we chat. And I think probably what I've always wanted in my life, having lost my father at 15, is a proper family home, because I didn't have that as a teenager. I did as a child, but I didn't as a teenager. And I've now got that for my kids. You know, my daughter comes home and surprises me yesterday evening. I didn't know she was coming, but this is her home. She can come whenever she likes. And it was wonderful to see her. And, you know, that's what the program has given me.
Lovely, thank you. And our last question, our question 12. What do you want your friend to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
I think probably something along the lines of, great to meet you in person at last. Because you have those friends, don't you, that you talk to all the time, but you've never met.
Yeah.
I think, to meet my best friend would be amazing.
Wonderful. Kathryn, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. You've been so courageous and so honest in your share. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you for being my guest on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you so much for inviting me along, Silvio. It's been lovely.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.